Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the No Offense Podcast with your host, Thomas Grice and
Rogelio and Good evening, everybody.
What's up, guys? It's been, I think, a little over a week since we recorded our last podcast. We got delayed a little bit because of various real-life things, but we're back, and we're better than ever. Ro suffered a little injury. Am I right, Ro?
Yeah, today during practice, I guess I stepped on my ankle wrong, and it just feels like someone stole my cookies, man. I'm just not in a great mood, but we're going to power through this and have a little fun because this is my favorite part of the week, so we're going to do it, all right?
Sounds good, man. Hope you're feeling better. I haven't injured myself in a while because I do little baby workouts for children. That's actually like what I'm afraid of when working out, is because like when I do injure myself, it tends to be like I'm out of commission for like 2 weeks. And then,
debilitating,
and then like I already have like baby gains, so it's like I got to be careful. So we have a lot to talk about today, kind of, sort of. We were gonna have a guest on today, but due to scheduling and stuff, that didn't work out. But you can look forward to more guests coming probably in our next episode. More and more guests on the show, so that we can switch it up, and it's not just us talking about things. We're trying to get more points of view. So we're going to start out the episode with our weekly disclaimer. And today's disclaimer is, it's really more of a question, which is, have you ever held a truly unpopular opinion? So I would like to pose this question to everybody who is sort of considering themselves to be like a political person or somebody who is ever,
involved
engaged
in the social.
If you ever engage in any type of social, like political conversation with other people, be it on Facebook or in person or anywhere else, and you've probably seen or been the person that gets sort of indignant and angry at somebody for having a different opinion than you, if they're on the other side of the aisle than you. It doesn't have to be even when you're talking to another person. It can be when you're just among people who agree with you, and you're talking about, let's say you're a Democrat or a liberal, and you're talking about Republicans, and you're talking about immigration, and you're talking about let's say Trump's idea to ban all Muslims, and then let's say that you're like, oh well, those idiots, they're just all racist, right? Why would they not want Muslims to come to the country? They must be racist. Well, you might think that policy or that idea is unconstitutional, and you're probably right. You might think that it's driven by racism. Maybe for some people, it's driven by some form of racism. But you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to the people who hold that opinion, if you really do want to change those opinions, to examine why people think that and understand it yourself, so that you're not just that guy that's calling the other side stupid. And Rogelio posted a great article that I shared, and like I got a lot of positive feedback. Or a lot of really good comments. That was called "The Other Side Is Not Dumb" by Sean Blanda. Ro, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so it's just an article essentially talking about what you and I were trying to do with this podcast. Is this idea that we're not holier than thou, or hold a better idea than anybody else. And when we do want to have discourse, we have the ability to be proven wrong. And also the idea that the people who don't hold the same ideologies or convictions that we do aren't dumb, and we shouldn't immediately label them as such, because all that does is just alienates them. And with that alienation, it makes them entrench their views. So you're never going to get anywhere with them if you just off the bat classify them as dumb or not knowing where you're coming from, or you understand what I'm saying? And like those people, because of this effect that happens, those people will think that we're dumb as well, So immediately it becomes just like an us versus them conversation, rather than like, how can we merge our ideas and become like, and actually form some sort of positive coalition, rather than just both of us get alienated from each other and entrench our views. And I think an interesting thing that it covers is I was on the debate team in college for like a year, and the idea, and it was always about you have to know the other person's debate better than the other person does in order to win the debate. Yeah. So whenever you're approaching any type of topic, like even for me, it's uncomfortable to think about like a deportation first, going around and deporting all Mexicans, you know. Right. It admittedly is uncomfortable for me to think about that sort of stuff. But even when I hear that, I have to really dissect what it means and where the people who are thinking like that are coming from. I can't immediately think of them as like, oh, these people are just racist pigs who hate all Mexicans, because that's a generalization that doesn't apply. And that's not fair, you know? And so I have to approach every single topic like that. And even though it might be exhausting, no one ever said the political process was easy, you know? Or like having social change was easy. And so I owe it to them to do that, as well as you owe it to other people to understand their topics, you know? Right. And so I think that's what the article covered. And I think it was such a relevant article for what you and I are trying to do. And I really was impressed by Sean Blanda.
Yeah, no, it was a great article. I think your example of deporting immigrants is a really great example, because like people, you know, that's like the perfect thing to use as an example of like something that could be taken as racist. And it's like, if you make the assumption, like, let's say I really, really do think that the influx of people into this country is displacing available jobs such that it is causing people who are already citizens of the country not to be able to get a job, pushing people into poverty, lowering living conditions for, you know, X million amount of people, then that premise for that, which is an actual premise that some people do consciously hold, is a, you know, arguably not a racist premise for having that, for supporting that policy. So, you know,
yeah, and I think a lot of the left likes to talk about privilege and stuff, and then they look at data and they look at facts and they're like, oh, well, Americans don't even hold those types of jobs, you know? And sometimes I want to argue, even though, like I said, it affects me personally because I am a Mexican and I am an immigrant, and I have seen data that's contrary to all these beliefs. Right. But maybe there are some Americans who feel like they're getting their jobs pushed out because the labor prices are so much lower for Mexicans that people would rather hire illegal immigrants. Right. So there's not like a debate about how much they're getting paid. You know, Americans can't do those jobs because it's below minimum wage, and they refuse to do them because they're not going to get paid what an American standard of living would be, you know? And so that comes from that idea that like, oh, Americans don't even hold those type of jobs. I just want to say like, well, your friends don't hold those type of jobs, but you don't know who is, you know? And so maybe the conversation should be even like there should be a regulation of how much people are getting paid, even in agricultural jobs, you know, or like that can change the conversation and like the economy of where we're going, rather than just like, oh, for holding those beliefs, you're racist, you know? And so I think it's an interesting thing to look into and talk about, you know? Although data is contrary, like illegal immigration's more than anything, it's kind of like a net positive than like a, you know?
Yeah, most that's of the information I've looked at has suggested that it's overall a net positive. Of course, there's like lots of different types of immigration. Like our immigration is different from people's immigration in different countries because we have a different economic situation. So I can see how it could also become very different from country to country. I tend to think that here, you know, I don't want to go too far into this conversation because we have a lot to cover, but I tend to think overall that immigration is a pretty positive thing for our country. I think there are limits to it. Like if you had like 500 million people come in at once, and like that's twice our population or something, then I think you'd obviously see some type of negative effects from that. But that's not what's happening. So, another thing on that note is that I tend to think of like if you truly think that you hold some type of knowledge or perspective that is more enlightened than somebody else, or allows you to think more clearly about a subject than somebody else. On the topic of privilege, you should think of that as like your privilege. Like you're lucky to be able to rationalize and consider things from the perspective that is more basically more truthful than somebody else. Like whenever you see some idiot on Facebook share something about that's basically racist or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, and you know that that's not true, your first instinct or reaction towards that person should not be like, I hate them, or they're idiots, or this, that, and the other thing. They're not lucky enough to have your background, your clarity of thought, your this, that, or the other thing, your compassion, empathy, whatever it may be, to not have that hateful or just wrong view.
Right. Yeah. I've never heard of it like that. That's such a good point. But at the same time, even having that privilege, you should know you shouldn't come from some sort of like pretentious place when you do talk to them. Like I think that everyone can stand to learn a little bit about politeness and just like knowing how to approach anybody, even if you hate them. If you hate them, or like think their ideas are so stupid, you should still be polite and should still know how to have a political discussion or a discussion without like sounding rude, or like, are you coming from a place of like ultimate knowledge? You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Over the past few years, as I've tried to become more like neutral, not like actually neutral, like I'll take sides on things that I think are right or wrong, but I basically assume that I could be wrong. And one of the most painful parts about that is that sometimes I find out or I read things that really do make me feel like, oh, like I might be wrong, or maybe both sides are wrong. Like that's one of the worst parts, is when you realize that, for example, neither the Republicans or the Democrats have something right, and then you really realize that you're just not going to get what you want from either side, and that's kind of painful. Or you realize that you have an opinion that nobody in this social circle shares with you, and that's also a really shitty thing. Anyway, I like the quote. I want to read one quote from that Sean Blanda article. And he's talking about like the social media of today and kind of what has emerged, especially in the past like 10 years or so, as social media has really blown up. He goes, "What is emerging is the worst kind of echo chamber, one where those inside are increasingly convinced that everyone shares their worldview, that their ranks are growing when they aren't. It's like clockwork. An event happens and then your social media circle is shocked when a non-social media peer group public reacts to news in an unexpected way. They then mock the other side for being out of touch or dumb." And so we see this happen all the time when like Trump does something and, oh man, it's dumb, And, maybe most of the time, most of the things Trump does can easily be sort of spent as dumb. But, for example, today or yesterday, I don't know when it was, and to be fair, I didn't go over this in detail, but I guess Trump came out in support of term limits for Congress people.
Right.
And
5-year term limits.
That's not dumb. Like, you're going around sharing every little dumb thing that Trump has ever said in his life, and, oh, he's so stupid. Well, this isn't stupid. Like, you're going to give any credit to him at all? I don't think that Hillary is presenting this this possibility. I could be wrong. That might be in the Democratic platform, but I don't think it is.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so
yeah,
credit where credit is due.
Right, exactly. And I think you and I have a low-key perspective, or like a lucky, I don't know what your Facebook feed looks like, but I have people who love Trump and I have people who hate Trump, Right. And then the people, sometimes I guess it's like the lone wanderer that hates Trump goes on the page, somehow ends up on the page of like the person who loves Trump.
Right.
And it will escalate to like a 30 comment
I've done this before.
Yeah, where it just becomes like a name calling battle about like, you're a sniveling fool, and like, no, you're an idiot who loves Hillary, and like, some shit like that. I'm just like, yo, how did it get like this? Like, everyone
you gotta chill, just chill. Like, what I've noticed about being a person who's not like, I'm not trying to talk myself up here, but I am not afraid to say that, the other side got, I feel like they're right, or criticize my side. And so when I do that, what I've noticed is like, I will go on to somebody who posts some like, maybe like Black Lives Matter type subject. Maybe they're saying that something was racist, and I'll be like, oh, well, maybe like it wasn't racist. Like maybe there was this other thing that like, maybe this is why it happened. And then I'll just get like, that I'll become that person to them. Like, no matter how many like pro-Hillary or like anti-racism things I've ever posted before, if I get this one thing wrong in their eyes, like I am now like an enemy. And then obviously vice versa for the other side. Like if I say one bad thing about Trump, which I've said many, like then I'm just this guy that just, I'm just this bleeding heart liberal. So like you
cuck.
You alienate. I'm just a cuck lord. Like you just alienate like people because everybody's chosen to be in one tribe. So like now I'm sure there's a lot of people, including people in my own family, people who I used to be friends with, who I've alienated because I have expressed some viewpoint that wasn't in alignment with their tribe.
Right. Exactly. So
Okay.
now I think what we should do, I think the plan was to go through and just say funny things that we saw on the internet or interesting things. Cover that, right?
Yeah, just recent happenings and some other stuff before we move on to our main topic. Yeah, so somebody on my Facebook feed posted an article that said that a body language expert said that Trump's lurking in the second debate when he was kind of, I guess, sort of behind Hillary was signs that he was going to physically assault Hillary, right?
Imagine. But just before we even get into like whether or not he could, but just imagine like the unprecedentedness of that, you know? And I'm sure he wouldn't lose his fervent voter base, but just imagine like the repercussions or like what would happen after the fact.
Look, there's literally no way that somebody who goes on a debate stage and punches a woman is going to win the presidency. Like, it's not going, like, that would never, ever, ever happen. Trump knows it. Trump is not, look, Trump might act stupid sometimes, but Trump is not that stupid. He's not that dumb. Nobody, like, he's not that dumb. And so what I said on this comment thread, I said, look, Trump is dumb, but he's not physically assault a presidential opponent during a debate dumb. And this person who seems like an overall like smart individual, educated individual, told me if he will stalk a woman on stage, he is capable of anything. God. And it just makes me think, like, where is your perspective? Because this same thing happened, but even worse during the Bush-Gore debate in 2000. Like, Gore went right up to Bush when he was answering a question, and he stood right next to him, and Bush was like, hey, what are you doing? And it was like a super funny, like, Bush, like, you know, Bush might not be the best guy, but he totally diffused that moment and made Gore look silly. And he was like right next to him. The way that it looked from the camera angle during this Trump Clinton thing, it looked like Trump wasn't even necessarily that close to Clinton.
Yeah.
And also, I think if I read correctly,
the camera angles.
The camera angle made it look like that, and also Trump, I think, was actually next to his chair, not her chair. So, like, that was actually the chair side that he was supposed to be on. And regardless, like I said before, and like you, I think, suggested, he's not going to punch somebody in the face or at all. He's not going to assault Hillary on stage. And if you think that is like the perfect example of you looking through the lens of your tribe. Like, you're not thinking clearly, in my humble opinion.
Exactly. And I don't know this young lady who you were having this discussion with, but it reminds me of this YouTube video that I saw one time, and like a series of YouTube videos about like how air conditioning is sexist. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
What? It's a joke, though. It's a joke, right?
No, it's not a joke. Like, apparently there's data that supports that women in the office get colder than men, yet they don't have as much control of the air conditioning meter in the office. And, like, they genuinely believe that, like, air conditioning is sexist, or, like, that someone needs to, like, there needs to be, like, a national discussion about who gets to run the air conditioning meter, you know? Yeah. And I'm an ally. I'm absolutely an ally. I'm totally for, like, some most feminist ideals. Maybe not third wave feminism, but, like, definitely like the earlier like suffragettes and like the bra burning shit and like slut shaming, all that stuff. But there is a certain point where it's like, okay, you know, like that's just toxic. What you're doing now is just not
toxic. Like, you have to pick your battles. I think what people don't think about, I'm going to say this a lot over this podcast, is like, we have 24 hours in each day. You're going to spend like 8 of it sleeping. You're going to spend like some amount of it doing something productive so you can live. You're going to spend some amount of it like eating and like shitting or whatever. And then like we have some small fraction out of each day, especially if you're like a fucking like young professional yuppie or whatever. Like, you have a small amount each day that you can kind of contribute towards like social, political movements and things of that nature. And if you're choosing to devote 1 hour of your time to like air conditioners are sexist, like, even if like your intention is better to like fix a larger problem, find like a better way to like leverage yourself in that conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because then you lose like so much legitimacy, because then as soon as someone hears that who doesn't understand, who's not already an ally, as soon as someone hears that, they're like, yo, there's like people in like Nigeria right now like getting killed by Boko Haram because they're actually women, you know, and they don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's actual like fights, feminism fights that you could fight. You know, like
people are sex slaves in ISIS, like in ISIS lands right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like in Saudi Arabia, women can't drive. That's like a first world kind of country. You know, like they make a lot of money there, and women aren't allowed to drive. Like the pilots can fly in as women, but as soon as they get off the plane, they can't drive a car. That's a conversation worth having. You know.
Yep.
So like, not saying like, oh, my fucking 9 to 5 office job that I get paid like almost 6 figures a year, you know, the air conditioning is sexist, so we should talk about that. Like, that's not a conversation that even is worth having. Like, okay, just go change the air conditioning, you know, like,
yeah,
you know, it's easy, solve it. Like, okay, let's solve it right there and then, you know.
Yeah, so, to be honest, if I'm being honest, I get cucked all the time in like professional situations. Like I get like I'm just gonna say that. Like I get like I get cold in the office. I don't adjust anything. I like have to shut up during meetings because like I'm not the important person. You know, like I have to like do work that I don't want to do necessarily, or maybe I don't even think it's productive. Like, these are things that happen to me as a white male, and I can only imagine if I was raised, you know, to the age that I am, you know, through my formative years, thinking the whole time that the whole world was against me because I'm a female or whatever else. And I'm not saying this stuff doesn't actually happen really, but I'm saying that it's very easy to like convince yourself that the world is against you and you're being interrupted in the meeting because you're a woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whenever in fact, like these are
point,
things
man.
that just like happen. Like I get interrupted all the damn time, and like it's super annoying, and I don't like it, and I think that it's maybe bad for the conversation, and maybe we can find a better way to talk. But like, I don't immediately jump to it's because this feature that I have.
Right.
Now, of course, I have to disclaimer that by saying that there are instances where people, especially women and people of color, don't advance in the corporate world because of some type of systemic prejudice or just explicit prejudice. But, you know, smaller things, I think we have to be careful which of those that we choose to zero in on and make sure that they are worth discussion and not just worth spending 30 minutes on Facebook, like jacking each other off about.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting phrase you say, jacking off each other, because it's just you and your echo chamber, like, yeah, cheering on. You're like, yeah, air conditioning's so sexist, bro. Like, yeah, we're both allies. And then you really don't.
Like, who did you win over there? Did you win anybody over?
No, exactly.
Probably not.
That's an interesting conversation. And then another thing we have written down here, Alex Jones, man, our favorite topic of conversation. Like,
he's a great guy.
He's hilarious.
He's a reasonable, like, well-balanced dude, you know?
See, like, if you want to be a centrist and you want to have, like, good political discourse, someone you should definitely look into is Alex Jones on Infowars.com. That guy,
he's just like a reasonable guy, you know? Like,
yeah,
he's very calm and centered, and like I appreciate his reasoned discourse. No, for those of you who haven't seen Alex Jones, he is just like a raving right-wing madman, basically. I don't think that that's an exaggeration. This dude is insane, and there are like plenty of hilarious clips of him screaming. He's like kind of like a very thick, stubby man. I'm not body shaming him, but I'm just trying to give you like some mental imagery. And he just yells and screams until he like turns into like this red like thumb person, and it's
like a ball of fire.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that this same guy, Alex Jones, and I wouldn't even call him on the right, really, because I think he'd be like on the right and on the bottom of the right.
He's like conspiracy right.
Yeah, he'd be like the troll of the right. You know, he's just like living under a bridge, and he comes out and he just takes off his shirt and just like foams at the mouth, and then he's like, he always plugs his little pills, his little like pre-workout or something. Right. I don't know what it is.
It's like, like body, like I think it's like almost like nootropics, maybe. I'm not sure, but like, yeah, he plugs his pills. He has like this YouTube channel. He always talks about how there's every conspiracy in the world happening, and we're kind of being a little hypocritical now because earlier we're like, respect the other side. I don't even consider this guy to be the other side. I consider this guy to be like on the other side of the other side of the other side of the other side. He's a
conspiracy theorist, you know. He's a conspiracy theorist, and that's not productive at all. For me and my ideas, like maybe some conspiracy theories are relevant because there's data to back them. But, you know, you and I were having a discussion the other day, like conspiracy theories for us at least, or definitely for us, because we had this discussion, is like it's not productive. And if you believe one, you kind of have to believe all of them, So it's just
and
not
if you
something
just
that I want to even
yell
talk
about
about.
them until you turn red, it doesn't make them more
Mm-hmm.
true. Like, okay, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Like, okay, fine, but you're not helping the case by just turning into like an angry red dwarf man and yelling about it. And he thinks that Hillary is I think isn't he like Hillary's a murderer type guy?
Yeah, he definitely comes from that vein, and also he's like Barack Obama is the devil, and I don't know if you saw his speech where Barack Obama smelled himself for sulfur, and he's like Alex Jones, like I don't smell like sulfur, and I just think that's so funny that like Barack Obama, the highest man in office, and it also is because like it's his last 6 months of the presidency, so now he's going back and roasting everybody because lately his speeches have been so fucking awesome, only way to describe it has been awesome, like just. Mr. Obama just coming out there.
Fucks given have just dropped tremendously.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, Alex Jones, we were just kidding about.
We love you, Alex Jones. Please come on the show, man. You're not an angry dwarf, man. You're a great dude, but you just gotta chill sometimes because it's like way too funny.
Or just tell us about what you think. I'd love to just pick Alex Jones' brain.
If we could honestly sit and if we can get him and Kanye. Oh, by the way, I'm going to see Kanye tomorrow night. It's gonna be lit. It's the children.
It's gonna be soup lit.
If we could just get them on the show together, just shooting the shit, maybe talking a little bit about what ancient royal family the Kardashians have descended from to control the world. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. So there's a guy, Mike Rowe. He's the host of I think 30 Jobs, right?
30 Jobs and a couple he's Chevy commercials. He's just a quintessential red-blooded American man.
Right.
Only way to describe it.
He's one of those celebrities that fits into the rare but known archetype of being a conservative celebrity, a vocally conservative celebrity. And, okay, so there's a meme. I'm going to call it a meme even though it's existed for a while. I feel like memes just started to exist after the year 2000. There were no memes before then. No, but so there's a meme that you should vote, right? It's your civic duty to vote. You should go vote. If you don't vote, you're betraying your country. You're a bad person and you're going to hell. But he had something to say about that. Basically, he was being interviewed on, I actually don't know what show, but the host's name was Jeremy because it's here in the text. And he had some stuff to say about voting as a civic duty. He said basically that it's not your uninformed person who knows nothing about politics civic duty to go out and vote. And he's a conservative, and his agenda is probably to, elect more conservative leaders and this, that, and the other thing. But I felt like what he had to say just in a vacuum was useful and relevant and worth reading. So I'm going to read a short snippet from that, and we can talk about it a little bit. He said, so no, Jeremy, I can't personally encourage everyone in the country to run out and vote. I wouldn't do it, even if I thought it would benefit my personal choice, because the truth is the country doesn't need voters who have to be cajoled, enticed, or persuaded to cast a ballot. We need voters who wish to participate in the process. So if you really want me to say something political, how about this? Read more. Spend a few hours every week studying American history, human nature, and economic theory. Start with economics in one lesson, then try Keynes, then Hayek, then Marx, then Hegel. Develop a worldview that you can articulate as well as defend. Test your theory with people who disagree with you. Debate, argue, adjust your philosophy as necessary. Then, when the next election comes around, cast a vote for the candidate whose worldview most seems in line with your own. Or don't. None of the freedoms spelled out in our Constitution were put there so that people could cast uninformed ballots out of some misplaced sense of civic duty brought on by a celebrity guilt trip. The right to assemble, to protest, to speak freely, these rights were included to help assure that the best ideas and the best candidates would emerge from the most transparent process possible. Remember, there's nothing virtuous or patriotic about voting just for the sake of voting. And the next time someone tells you otherwise, do me a favor. Ask them who they're voting for. Then tell them you're voting for their opponent. Then see if they'll give you a ride to the polls. So, first off, at the end there, I do think I would give somebody a ride to the polls who was voting for my opponent. I think that was kind of a weak argument there at the end. But for most of that, I totally agree with what he said. What do you think, bro?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just had an interesting thought. I don't know if you've like read into this a lot, but every time I talk to like really really right conservatives, they hit me with like, oh, the liberal media, and there's like a liberal spin, and like they want politicians to be liberal, and like they're using celebrities to help them with that goal. And maybe like the idea of like go out and vote is just so they can like I mean, I'm not saying liberal ideas are wrong, but maybe there is some sort of like deeper meaning and concern to just go out and vote go out and vote movement, maybe it is just because I understand the people who they're marketing that to, like go out and vote, is because people are going to vote liberal, or is it just because those people are like that age group, that demographic, and just they happen to vote liberal? What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Well, this is an interesting dilemma because while I agree with a lot of what Mike Rowe said there, I think that, and I do think that there is a liberal bias to the media for a number of reasons. But I think one of the reasons, and I think one of the reasons that get out the vote is something that the media promotes, is simply that if everybody voted, I don't know what the data is, so I'm going to feel dumb if this is not true, but I'm pretty sure if everyone voted, it would just be like a Democrat elected every single time. So I don't know. What does that mean? Does that mean that it's bad for people to go vote? I mean, obviously, if you're conservative, you might think that. Or does it mean that the plurality of people has the right idea, the majority of people has the right idea, and that we, like that's the best way to get the right idea out of a population, or to get the idea that benefits everyone the most, then you should want the most people contributing to the election of that idea or that person or whatever.
Yeah, and I think, and I've said this for a while now, but I think that the Republican Party has totally been missing the mark on what they're focusing on, and they're focusing on social issues, which is so controversial, and that's just with the natural progression of time are going to just be voted in, like gay rights,
Right.
all that stuff, like social issues are just naturally going to be voted in. And so the political parties should really be focused on economic issues and things that like deal on a macro level rather than a micro level.
Right.
And that's where the Republican Party is losing, is the fact that they're not ever going to get a group of people to ever agree on like, oh, women belong in the household anymore. Like that's never going to happen ever again. You know, like those ideas that have already like started moving, and like the cogs started working in people, and like those people are raising their kids a certain way, like that battle is lost,
Yep, that's over.
So yeah.
Well, it could go in two different ways. They could move in a very libertarian direction where they do just basically focus a lot on sort of economics and deregulation and things like that. That's one direction they could go. Another direction, which is something that like Milo Yiannopoulos kind of espouses, and I don't think this will necessarily catch on, although there's something to it strategically maybe, is that Milo tries to back up, instead of saying like stuff like, oh, like gay marriage is wrong or something like that, and it's wrong because God said so. He doesn't say that. He says things like,
they're not going to be as happy.
He says things like children are more successful when they're raised. People are more happy. He tries to back this up with data, with science, with what have you. And that's a whole nother discussion, which is what happens when data or science or facts present information that doesn't make liberals happy or doesn't fit sort of a social, the current social climate, right? And that's why we don't see studies very often that are studying like differences between races or sexes and things like that, because there's a fear in academia, I think, as well as just a tradition of like not really doing that now. And so I guess like that is another path that like the Republican Party could go down, is like trying to be more data driven in their bigotry, arguably. So
yeah, I agree with that. And so I guess for this week we're gonna stamp Mike Rowe with a killing it, because that was a good little thing,
Yeah,
killed it.
Yeah, I think killing
I
it.
agree with him.
I think killing it. Giving him the props. There's a thing that happened today. I think it was released today. It may have been 24 hours ago or so. But there was a organization called, what are they called?
Veritas.
Project Veritas.
Yeah.
By a guy named James O'Keefe, who did sort of the controversial Acorn undercover video several years ago in the early part of Obama's presidency. He, or his organization, released a couple of new videos claiming to reveal some basically voter fraud and corruption in the Democratic Party. Roe, I know you didn't get that much of a chance to really catch up on this, but basically there's these videos and they're kind of catching fire in the conservative blogosphere and internet media. And of course, they're all like, oh, why isn't CNN reporting on this? And basically, these videos are, maybe there's something that they're pointing at, but they're basically super shady and not edited. Or they're way edited, like they're a lot of cuts, and they don't actually, from what I saw, present any like hard data. You know what I mean? Like, okay, yeah, you say that people are. One of the claims is people are being bussed around in New York City, like they're going to minority neighborhoods and picking people up in buses and taking them to go vote, and this is getting more Democrats in office, I think is the implication. Well, that seems like a thing that people would be very likely to get caught doing. Like, it seems very difficult to get buses together, load people up in buses, take them to voting booths and all that, and not have some type of journalistic outlet catch on to that and report it, because that would be a huge story and get them, lots of clicks and notoriety, and it would be a big thing. I think a lot of people would want to expose that, myself included. So I don't know. What do you think? Does this seem like something we should be concerned about?
Yeah. So I saw we kind of saw the video a little bit, and it was just like that guy. They were having a conversation at a bar or something, and he was talking about like how there is voter ID and like.
I think what he was saying is that apparently New York City has some law where you don't have to present an ID, or you don't have to present a driver's license or something. Yeah.
And so the guy was just shooting the shit saying like, oh yeah, they can show up and say that they're John Doe and not be John Doe, which I don't know the legitimacy of that. I've seen data. Recently this week, I've seen data backing the fact that by like a reputable source, like a totally unbiased source, like I think it was like New York attorney, something like someone that doesn't have anything to gain from this, saying that like voter fraud is almost impossible to commit, Right. And then in regards to John O'Keefe, the guy from Project Veritas, got sued. James O'Keefe. He got sued over the Acorn footage, right. And he like has a misdemeanor for going into these places under false pretenses,
right?
Right? Because he edited the video and distorted chronologies and just, the video wasn't necessarily. It portrayed an image that wasn't honest. And also, he's a contributor for Breitbart, and he directly works with Andrew Breitbart, and he's like commissioned to do all these videos, Wow. So I'm sure there's some sort of like incentive for him to like take a video and alter it, because I've seen data this week about like voter fraud and how it's almost impossible. And maybe there is a gray area with that bus situation. I don't know, like. What do you think about
first
that?
of all, like, is it happening? And then if it is happening, what does that mean? Like, is it and I should mention I'm not super knowledgeable about the laws. Maybe it is illegal to pick people up in a bus and take them to go vote. I don't know. Or maybe what they're doing is they're taking people to go vote, and they are not the people that they say they are. They're going to multiple voting stations. I don't know enough to say what the situation is, but assuming that they're just picking people up to go vote, I mean, it's very hard for me to say, maybe that's a little shady, but is that even illegal? I mean, is it really even voter fraud to take people to go exercise their quote-unquote civic duty? I don't know. I think, I don't think that we can really come to any solid conclusion here about what's taking place or the relevancy of these videos, except that they seem shady. They come from like a shady person. A person is clearly on a certain side. And I have yet to see any hard data from an independent source that suggests that voter fraud is rampant enough to, for example, push the election in one direction or the other.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And he definitely is a contributor for Breitbart. And we know that Breitbart is not... I mean, a lot of media sources aren't. They all have their own spins, but Breitbart has...
isn't.
Yeah, as a particular spin and a particular narrative that they want to portray.
Right.
And and then that idea that like, oh, why isn't the news media covering this? Is I think is a great foray into our next topic, which is Obama talking about like the Wild West media landscape, where like anytime any type of news comes out that's like relevant to that can be interesting or can be like shown that has facts, any type of like the smallest bit of facts, the news media comes out in droves and just like, you know, just gets their fingers in, and then everyone has their own spin, everyone has their own bias, and then eventually no one really knows what actually happened.
Right.
So
Yeah. This Yahoo.com article, the opening line is, President Barack Obama on Thursday decried America's wild, wild west media environment for allowing conspiracy theorists a broad platform and destroying a common basis for debate. And I think basically this kind of ties back into the social media thing. Like, I think we're seeing a strong theme about the flow of information here. You can just start sort of a quote-unquote news site. I would call it like a pseudo-news site. And I'm not putting like Breitbart in this category. I think that they're just sort of a biased journalistic source, but I wouldn't necessarily call them a pseudo-news site per se. But certainly
they say the news, but they're like they say the news that they choose to portray is like very
editorialized.
Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then it's like it's this incendiary, you know, like I'm just gonna look at the first cheers erupt for Trump's drain the swamp plan at Pence rally in North Carolina, you know? Right. Just like 4 students shot in San Francisco high school parking lot, 4 suspects shot. It's just incendiary and like scary to read. If you go on Breitbart every day, you're like, holy shit, like the state of our union is so messed up, you know? Like,
right.
You know, so
So I think that since you can just click share on basically anything on Facebook, and people who read Hillary Clinton responsible for the deaths of hundreds close to her over the years, you know, they're not going to go on a wild fact-checking Google search. I like to think a lot of people would, but a lot of people also would not. And there doesn't seem to be much of a standard for what is truthful and what isn't, or what is valid and what isn't. And of course, people are going to spin this as Obama trying to. He says, I should read this first. He says, we are going to have to rebuild within this wild, wild west of information flow some sort of curating function that people agree to. That's something that Obama said. So he's talking about having some sort of curating function. People who are cynical are going to say that he is looking to control the flow of information. He does go on to say the answer is obviously not censorship, but it's creating places where people can say, this is reliable and I'm still able to argue safely about facts and what we should do about it. So basically it seems like there's a desire from Obama, and I think from a lot of people, to have some way to separate out facts from opinion and data from editorialization.
From conjecture. Absolutely. Yeah, and exactly. And an interesting point, something that proves that exact point, where people are just literally just will look at a headline and then believe it, or just look at the headline and then immediately comment on that, or make like take it to their day-to-day lives as facts, is Greg Abbott, our wonderful governor. He posted, and this is like a funny thing that I read recently. He posted a article about 2 suspected ISIS recruits traveling to Mexico busted in Texas, you know?
Right.
And so he posted that article, and
these are the white guys, right? These are some white dudes.
Yeah, these are 2 guys from Wisconsin. And I love to do this occasionally when there's like these interesting articles, is just go into the comment sections, you know, put on my my rain boots, trudge through the comment sections, and see what interesting things I can find. And so, here we go. Open border Democrats and Republicans, Rob Johnson said this. Open border Democrats and Republicans know this isn't just a possibility, but a reality. And as leaked emails from Hillary proved, she needs a compliant citizenry to become president. When they deem this to be a serious level, they will then declare martial law and suspend the Constitution, or what's left of it anyway. So this guy, the presumption that this guy is making is that by allowing the border to be open, there's going to be eventually so many of these ISIS people inside our borders that there's going to be martial law and Hillary can become the ultimate dictator, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing about this article, the unfortunate thing about this article, and the fact that people aren't actually reading this or going on a fact-finding hunt, is that these guys are from Wisconsin. They're legal American citizens going to Mexico to fly over to the Middle East to go get recruited by ISIS.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And the comments are just people like
that didn't think for even 3 seconds about like what they're posting.
Yeah, exactly. So they just like immediately say, "Oh wow, ISIS is here." You know, like we should be very, very concerned.
Yeah, this is like sort of the example of something that maybe you shouldn't give that much respect to, is people that literally didn't take the time to even read the article, saying, twisting it into some totally crazy conspiracy. Like, I mean, yeah, this is Alex Jones territory we're entering here, boys.
Yeah,
and girls.
Exactly. And so I'm gonna do one last one just for fun. This one's awesome. This one is really, really awesome. His name is Clayton Buck. And here you go.
His name is Buck. And he came to comment.
Here's what he said. How hard is it to infiltrate our porous border? Heck, take a typical Syrian man. Teach him a few Spanish phrases, and I dare you to find him in a pack of Mexican laborers sneaking over the border. The only difference is what he'd have in his backpack: a Quran and some C4. Okay, so like that's almost off the bat all you need to know about Clayton Buck,
right.
You know. But I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he does have some legitimate fears about Syrian refugees. But I think a good word of advice, and as we proceed with this podcast, we should definitely always do like a comment section, because I always think it's hilarious. But good word of advice is read the article before you start posting, you know. So
yeah, shout out to our friends Buck and was it Rob
Johnson.
Yeah, shout out to Rob Johnson and Buck Clayton. Y'all are great guys. You're really sharing the knowledge there. So this kind of moves on to our last point before we move on to the main topic of the podcast. Believe it or not, there is a main topic that we haven't gotten to, and that is Trump and his claims that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats are, drumroll please, rigging the election. Yeah, you heard it here, not first. Probably you've heard it several times. But the Democrats and Hillary Clinton are rigging the election. And yeah, so that's why Hillary is going to win. Not because Trump has been caught on tape talking about arguably sexually assaulting women, talking about, I don't know, he would basically fuck his own daughter if she was not his daughter, talking about what else has he done?
Just Trump being a reality TV show star,
horribly, basically pseudo-racist things. He has dug his own grave for the past year, and now he's trying to spin this narrative that the Democrats are going to rig the election, and that's why he's going to lose. This is actually fantastic entertainment.
Yeah, it is fantastic entertainment, but also at the same time, though, Tom, it's dangerous rhetoric.
Oh,
though.
No.
It's very, very dangerous, you know, because what he's going to do is he's firing up a base, and then he also has people signing up to be Trump voter observers. So they essentially sign up to go to like voting booths and make sure that everybody is voting fairly and not rigging it. And that's so dangerous, because like, what are the repercussions of saying something like that, you know? Right. And I think Trump has done this throughout the election hundreds of times, not hundreds of times, but plenty of times, where he creates this fantasy Trump that only the people that follow him believe. And like Kellyanne Conway will create this fantasy Trump where it's like, oh no, Trump is the victim here. Like the media is totally against Trump, when in reality, Trump is the one saying these things. You know, he's the one who's saying these things, and I guess he doesn't understand what precedence means. But like by saying this rhetoric, he's creating precedents, and the implications of what he's saying a lot of the times is very dangerous, especially for an American frame of mind. You know, like a democracy the way we have it and set up, like the Constitution that we understand. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, it's definitely dipped from entertainment over time. This election, Trump has dipped from entertainment to very dangerous. It's become at the beginning of the election, I actually thought that maybe he was like a Democratic or like libertarian plant to kind of steal the election or give it to Hillary, because if, you cherry pick a lot of the things Trump has said that were like libertarian, like I would have liked, some of the things, but he's clearly moved into this horrible, dangerous demagogue and became his final form that we all should have known that he was going to become. And now he's trying to, as he falls into Mount Doom as Hillary, aka Frodo, pushes Gollum, aka Trump, into Mount Doom, he is trying to bring in Frodo and the Ring, which is our democracy, into Mount Doom with him. And will he be successful? Stay tuned for the sequel to find out. Okay, so we have a main topic to get to. We've already wasted a lot of time talking about horrible things that are very depressing, but we're going to move on to... so the topic today is racism in our lives and people around us. We're going to try to keep it very personal and not so much about racism in the world or in the country as a whole. I'm going to try to not talk too much about like Black Lives Matter or some of the more recent high-profile things and talk about it more from our own eyes. Right. And as a white man but we do want to passing man, I'm sure that we will be taken very seriously on this topic.
But we do eventually want to talk about Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, But
yeah, that's just like a whole podcast on its own. So
yeah, that's like a whole other kind of worms. So we wanted to talk about like personal things. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I'll let you start.
All right, so I'm just gonna describe myself just in case nobody knows what I look like. I'm Mexican. I was born and raised in Mexico. Came over here when I was like around 8 or 9. Straight up Mexican. But I can pass for a Caucasian guy, and I definitely hang out with more Caucasian people, and kind of like a white dude. So I really never experienced racism per se personally. Maybe I've experienced microaggressions, but I use that word loosely because I don't feel insulted by them. But essentially what a microaggression is like someone giving you like a backhanded compliment, So like people would be like, oh, you have a good accent for a Mexican, or oh wow, you can read really fast for a Mexican, or oh, you're very tall for a Mexican, or like things like that in that vein, which aren't insulting to me, but I can see how it can eventually bother somebody who's just like, yo, what the fuck, like that's not.
Of course,
cool
I can
anymore,
read. Like I got all the medals in accelerated reader in elementary school. Fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, of course, but obviously that doesn't even I don't even think about it. When someone says something like that to me, I don't think like, oh, microaggression. Like, I saw a video about someone comparing microaggression to mosquito bites. And I don't know, like I get it all the time because I work at a school, but I don't know. It doesn't really bother me at all. But the first time I ever dealt with like racism.
Hold on. Before you get to the first time you dealt with racism, do the kids at your school ever microaggress you? Do they ever say things about your race?
Oh yeah, all the time. Like they'll be like, Mr. T, what are you? Are you Mexican? And I'll be like, yeah, I'm Mexican. They're like, oh wow, you don't even look Mexican, or oh wow, you're tall. Like the little kids will light me up. But I'm not even gonna begin to talk to you about what the little kids say to me, dude. Like this little girl, like she's in my D Hall class, like on Tuesday and Thursdays. And bro, she like calls me Mr. Titty, I don't even know, like that's like straight up aggression. That's not a microaggression. That's like
Why did she call you Mr. Titty?
Because like my name, like I tell him to call me Mr. T, but I guess she got in her head to call me Mr. Titty, and now she calls me Mr. Titty all the time. And I'm like, oh my god, I don't want this to catch on because then I'm gonna have all these badass kids calling me Mr. Titty all the time. That's horrible, Shit.
That's hilarious.
But anyways, yeah, so I get microaggressed and actually aggressed all the time at work, so.
It's still a microaggression, even if it's a real aggression, because it's like from a micro person.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good point. Or maybe it's an aggression. No, it's definitely, it's a microaggression if it's a real aggression. But if it's a microaggression from a micro person, it's like a mini aggression. Yeah, exactly.
It's a nano aggression.
A nano aggression. And then if you like from like a, never mind. We're broaching.
This is important stuff for us to talk about for sure. The size of aggressions.
Yeah, exactly. It's important. It's an important topic. Anyways, so the first time I ever experienced, or even thought, had to think about racism, and as a Mexican who came over here who had to learn English, I never thought about any type of racism until one time. It was me and all my siblings were in a car, and my older brother was driving. He had just enrolled at University of Houston, and I was in the back seat hanging out with my boy Kabor, which is a black guy, and my little brother. And I said the word, here we go, coming real close. I said, nigga. I said the N-word, I said it. And I said it in, I guess, such a way that, like, my older brother, like, heard it. And so he pulls over into the Dairy Queen parking lot. And he takes me out of the car. And he puts me in front of the car. And he looks me in the eye. And he says, do you understand what that word means? And right. I cursed in front of him at this point before,
Right.
But he looks at me and he's like, do you understand what that word means, Rogelio? And I was, like, quiet, and I didn't know what to say, so I almost started crying. And I was like, no, not really. I just know it's like a funny word. And he's like, do you understand the level of like offense that you are doing by saying that word? Like, before you use a word, you have to know what it means. Do you understand like what that word means and what that word means for a black person like Kabor? Like, do you really understand? And I'm sure Kabor was in the car like with his finger in his mouth, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I'm sure he didn't know either, but like, that was the first time I ever had to confront, like, saying something that was inappropriate or not knowing what something meant. And like, after that, I like decided to learn what words meant before I used them, obviously. But like, it was the first time that I ever had to come face to face with like racism, and like, this word means a lot more than I think it means. And before I use it, I should know in what context I should use it, or with whom I should use it, or whether or not I should use it at all. You know what I'm saying? So, because I know you and I, we have an interesting perspective because we went to school in Houston, and like, I guess you could talk more about this.
Well, I was going to ask you because I think I'd like to hear from you, but how do you think growing up in Houston? Well, actually, have you lived anywhere else? You've lived in New Orleans?
Yeah, I lived in New Orleans straight out of high school for a year and a half, and it's a different vibe than Houston. But like, what do I think about
what do you
race
think?
relations?
How has first of all, how's growing up in Houston informed sort of like your views on racism, your experiences of racism, and like interactions with people who are different than you? And if New Orleans did offer you any other type of perspective on that, then you can touch on that too.
Yeah, so I guess in Houston, dude, like off the bat, all I had to say right to answer that question is Trill City. Paul Wall, like some of our like great rappers, like Houston rappers, are like white, and like there's never really a conversation about like white or black. Like
hold on, I gotta stop you because right off the bat, like some people grow up in cities that don't have a strong hip hop culture. So when you go right into like talking about like, oh, we have these rappers, like you've already lost some people. Like, okay. I think it's important to note. I'll hand the mic back to you here in a second, but I think it's important to note that hip hop culture in particular, which is a black art form basically, or originally it was at least, and now it still basically is, but with more players in the public eye that are not necessarily black. It was very big in Houston. That culture is huge there, and I think growing up, I remember on the elementary school bus jamming out to South Park Mexican and DJ Screw and like Big Hawk, and I didn't even necessarily know who they were at the time, but it was jamming on the radio, and certainly I don't know about you, but for me, I was surrounded by people of all different races, and not just all different races and backgrounds. Like they would also be from not just Hispanic people, but Hispanic people who were raised in America, and Hispanic people who had sort of just came, maybe from another country, and not just that, people from all different economic classes. So people who are very rich and very poor and very middle class, and then in all layers of that spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's exactly what I was talking about. Like the idea of Trill City, like the culture here, I think is different. I don't know if you'll ever see like a big race riot happening here in Houston, because I feel like everyone, I don't want to say this necessarily because I don't want to sound like this is some sort of utopia, but for the most part, people get along here, and like there's not really like an outright racism because it is a big city, so there's like an understanding that like we're all homies, like it's Trill City, you know what I'm saying? Like Tom Herman got a grill, which is like,
right.
Tom Herman is the coach for U of H. He got a grill. and like it was all smiling and shit, and like there wasn't no talks about appropriation or nothing like that. It was just like he got a grill and that's that, you know. It was just cool.
Yeah, like the main person who creates grills in our city is
Asian.
He's an Asian guy named TV Johnny who is super famous for making grills for everybody who comes through Houston. Everybody famous who comes through Houston, and he has like jewelry shops where you can get grills customized and yeah, so that's just a big part of the culture, and it's basically black culture, right? So I always felt like I was involved in a piece of culture that to other people in other cities, that especially those that were not raised in cities with hip hop that was very strong in their culture, they might think that I'm like I don't know,
a poser,
appropriating that culture. I remember we used to have like tons of rap battles at parties growing up, and like I'm not gonna like brag or anything, but I did roast a lot of people in some rap battles, and you know, like it was just a natural thing. Like I don't know, like it, you know. And then I think today some people would call certain things, maybe not rapping in particular, because that is pretty ridiculous, but you know, dreadlocks and etc. That would be cultural appropriation, which we won't talk about too much today. But yeah. So moving on to, did you have anything else in that story you wanted to share, or was that?
No, that was pretty much it. I think that's the only form of like racism I've ever dealt with. I have dealt with like observing racists, I guess. Like I know some racists, you know.
I think we've definitely seen. We do need to like follow up and say like, yeah, there's definitely racism like in Houston. There are racists in Houston in the sense that there are people who maybe hold some ignorant views, and that goes for white people, and that goes for black people, and that goes for Hispanic people, and that goes for Asian people. I've heard racist things come out of the mouth, and I'm not discussing like the systemic versus individual racism thing right now, because there are people who will say that racism can only be systemic and only the oppressors, aka white people, can be racist, and like I'm not going to entertain that discussion right now. I'm just talking about people saying things about people who are from races other than them that are negative. And some people have said those things in my presence in Houston and actually meant it. And then another thing that happens that I noticed a lot in Houston growing up is people joke about those things with each other. And I think this happens everywhere, but especially in Houston, like black people would pick on white people and say, you know, call them you cracker or whatever.
Crackers,
and then
shit,
vice versa for everything else. And it was always, for the most part, a friendly thing. Like, and I saw very close people that I was very close friends with, you know, we, you know, maybe pick on each other, like maybe somebody, and an Asian person would make fun of himself for like eating a bunch of rice. I remember my friend Brian Tren, shout out to Brian Tren, but he would always like, you know, just make like rice jokes and stuff, and like not funny or anything today, especially, but like it was just a joke, right? It wasn't taken seriously. There was no hate behind it, and it certainly wasn't contributing to some sort of racial divide necessarily.
Right. So I think that we're lucky in that regard, where we didn't really have to deal with some of that stuff. And you know what? I have an interesting point, though.
Right.
I've had more uncomfortable situations with people stereotyping me, dealing with the left, than I have had with like people that I know are racist, or maybe hold some sort of like worldview where like, oh, Mexicans are stealing our job.
Right.
You know, like I'm a big guy. I used to wear like a fitted cap, turned around, you know, like Sperry's, short shorts. But I was involved in academia a lot, and so when I would go to these like events or whatever, people would see me and then off the bat immediately classify me as like a boorish bro dude who was like doesn't deserve of any respect or like polite conversation, and maybe you shouldn't even talk to this guy because he's already an asshole, you know. And I deal with that a lot. Like I deal with that often, where like people will immediately classify me as like an asshole, or like, oh, and especially the left or the people who are with liberal ideals, like they'll immediately be like, this guy is just an asshole, like he's not an ally, everything he says is full of shit. And like I've dealt with more uncomfortable situations from the left because of my appearance than I have had from like straight up racists that I know are racist. Right. You know, there's not that politeness, I guess. Like it maybe comes from the fact that like they're just tired of dealing with people that look like me, or they're just weary of people that look like me. But I think that's something interesting to talk about. You know, like, have you dealt with that ever? Or
yeah, I don't know. Like growing up, obviously I'm from a white family, and like my family is really. I didn't really get exposed to much racism from them. And I don't really recall a lot of white people growing up, like redneck types really being that explicitly racist. Also didn't really hang out with a lot of redneck type people necessarily, so maybe I just wasn't around them that much. But yeah, most of the sort of negative anger, conflict I saw growing up between people, a lot of it seemed to be just due to when I was younger, it seemed to be due to just growing up, just young kids being stupid. And then when I got to college, especially when I moved to Dallas, which is not a sort of, it's not like Houston, and it's probably, first of all, a little bit less diverse, still really diverse, but maybe not quite as diverse. And also not as sort of like hip hop culture oriented. Like it feels more like a white city. Like it feels more like white is the dominant culture, whereas in Houston, hip hop and sort of like art and things seem like a little bit more dominant. And I think that moving to Dallas and going to school there, I was kind of exposed to some of what you're talking about, which is, maybe I wore like a backwards cap, and maybe I like wasn't necessarily fitting the appearance of like a liberal academic or what have you. And then sometimes people would assume that maybe I was like, I don't know, not worthy of discussion or something like that. Like I've definitely had that feeling before, and it wasn't from like a racist redneck, right? It was from like some like stuck up liberal person, or like a social justice oriented individual.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, exactly.
So like I've definitely had a couple people. What's happened? I know there's at least one girl that I know that's commented on my Facebook recently. Whenever I asked about, it was some type of question. I wish I could remember. I'm just tired, but it was about like racism and what are some examples of cultural appropriation? That's what it was. And it was somebody from school who was clearly very lefty and just basically liking all the comments of a person and agreeing with a person that was giving all these examples of a cultural appropriation, like white people having dreadlocks and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's more what I've seen in terms of like conflict with other people, is like people assuming that you're being like not an ally because maybe you don't agree that like
just even asking a question.
Maybe you don't think dreadlocks are like the worst thing that ever happened, so you're like ignorant. This assumption of ignorance because you don't agree with all their viewpoints.
Yeah, and so that goes for both sides. And one time on Facebook, there's this girl that she's a really, really cool girl. She's awesome. She plays on the women's rugby team here. But we're talking about Thanksgiving. And I argued that like there was bigger problems, bigger fish to fry than Thanksgiving, and like Thanksgiving has forayed into like just like a family event where you go and like it's a good excuse and a good holiday, like hang out with your,
all right?
Yeah, exactly. And so like I like minimized it, and she like got really, really upset with me and like blocked me and like didn't talk to me.
Was this person a friend of yours? Like, would you consider them a friend?
Yeah, she was my friend, dude. She was my straight up friend, and like she totally like she lost she lost it, dude. She fucking hated that I had a different opinion than her, and she like blocked me. And we had a conversation beforehand about how like she doesn't like when people aren't allies, and she's tired of arguing with people about things stuff like that. And I didn't think about it at the time, and I kind of felt like an asshole, But now with this podcast, I'm like thinking, well, it's kind of like your responsibility to talk about these things. Like if you believe it, tell me why you believe it, and don't get all mad if I don't hold the same idea as you. Like we can still be friends. And like she blocked me, and like I think I talked to her like a couple times after that, but it was so different from then on.
Facebook, and then like
she blocked me, Twitter unfollowed me, like fucking
People are
print,
shit, man.
printed out my phone number and like ripped it up and shit. You know? Like,
God damn it, I can't block you on the phone, but I'll rip this phone number up. So I have like one thing I want to talk about as we kind of wrap up. I thought it was kind of a good example of these people that you're talking about, sort of people that just assume your ignorance and things like that. So there was a guy, once again, on Facebook. I know we're tired of talking about Facebook, but it's just where a lot of shit goes down these days. So this guy posted, I don't know how I actually became friends with this person. I think he lives somewhere in the Midwest, and he posted something about how I guess he's a waiter at a restaurant, and he's a black guy, and he is kind of on the social justice like oriented side of things, and he talks a lot about sort of black issues a lot, and more power to him. It's good to talk about these things, but he posted about how some women of color were sitting at. He didn't specify; those are the words he used. Women of color. So I don't know if they were black or if they just weren't. I don't know what they were, but they were women of color, and they were sitting at a booth at his restaurant. And he said, he saw some white guys who came in, and a guy went to their booth and asked them, "Hey, can we have your booth? And we'll give you $20 if we can have it, because it's my friend's birthday and we have a bunch of people and we could really use it." And apparently he was being a dick about it. Like, apparently the guy was not being nice after the people told him no.
The man of no color?
Yeah, white dude.
Okay.
And so what the guy that posted this on Facebook said, and he posted a big long post, so I don't want to, it's possible I'm missing details, but that's like the gist of it, right? He said that was a racist thing. And a lot of people, I think mostly white people, admittedly, said, well, okay, no, like people ask if they can have other people's spots all the time. I know I've done this before where I have like a big party and like somebody has like 2 people at a 6 spot and we're like, hey, like, could we use this table? And generally, I've never been a dick about it. It either works or, it doesn't. It's not a big deal. So maybe this guy was being a dick, but a lot of people suggested that, maybe it wasn't a racist act. And then after basically everyone who argues that maybe this isn't a racist act was basically, after they all did this, they were all basically implied to either be a racist or not to be in a position to understand. Like people basically, and I remember in particular one person posted, racism is defined by the oppressed, not the oppressors. And I was like, okay, no.
What is that? Cultural Marxism, right?
Well,
that's what that's called.
Yeah,
like
I think
oppressed
I
versus
think so.
oppressor mindset.
I'm not too familiar with. Yes, that sounds right. I'm not too familiar with this catchphrase of cultural Marxism, but to me, if a thing happens in the world, that thing is either racist or it's not. Right? We can agree that racism exists, and we can agree that some things are racist. But if these guys were asking for this table because it was an open table that they wanted, that had more spots that they thought they could use better, and they were dicks about it, okay, then that's a bad thing, but it isn't necessarily racist, right?
Racism,
and so that's all that people were saying, right, is that this isn't necessarily a racist thing. And then, of course, everybody had to jump in and say, white people can't possibly understand, white people don't have the perspective to understand racism, white people don't get to define what is racism, and like that's not what people were trying to do. They were just saying that based on the information that you presented, this may not have been a thing that was based on racism. And and of course, the assumption is that you're just being a dick white person, you're feeling guilty or this, that, and the other thing. It's not necessarily true. Like you're just trying to point out, like some people are fucking assholes. First and foremost, before people are racist, people are assholes. Like people will always be assholes. If it was just white people in the world, there would still be assholes. If it was just black people, there would be assholes. If it was just Asian people, there would be assholes. It doesn't matter. So you don't just get to define something as racism because it ruined your night or whatever. And I think that people are looking at things through the lens of like trying to see it through the lens of racism. And sometimes it is that, and then sometimes it's not. But
yeah, and then the times that it's not, if you're trying to look at it through that lens, you're going to succeed. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like you can look at anything through any lens and argue that point.
Right.
And I think the point you're trying to make right now is don't immediately assume something unless it's like proven, Right. But then I don't know, and then you know what sucks though, Tom?
What?
Is that we don't even have the right to say these type of things.
What?
You know, like a lot of SJWs would immediately be like, what the fuck are these dudes talking about? Like, they're two kind of white guys.
Right.
You know, like what? Like, why are they even, like, off the bat, we're already racist and misogynist, you know? And that sucks, you know? Like, if we really want a social change.
You're silencing people's voices. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do it under the
absolutely.
guise. You can do it under the guise of social justice. You can do it, you know, and I've really, honestly, to God, even though I don't really believe in God, honestly, to myself, have been trying to listen more. The problem is that just because I listen doesn't mean, you know, just because you are from an oppressed group, I'll use that term, does not mean that everything that comes out of your mouth is gospel. And just because you want to see something as racist, unfortunately, it might just be a dick move. And it's important that and I think it cheapens what racism is, because racism is one of the horrible malignancies of humanity is racism. And we need to be very honest and sincere about when it's occurring, where, why, and how. And I don't think just labeling anything that could be racist as racist is productive. And I think it's assuming the worst out of other people, which is what we started this podcast to stop. And we started this specific episode talking about, is don't assume the worst out of people. Assume that maybe there's a better motive.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah. So I guess that's a great way to end the podcast. Is like, don't assume, have conversations, and try to approach every topic with like a clear and fair brain, you know, and be polite. Most importantly, be fucking polite, dude. I hate people who are unpolite, dude. I really don't.
I'm definitely guilty of being an asshole sometimes. I'm working on it, but it's just, you know, I'm kind of I can be a little sarcastic sometimes, and I know it's not productive. It certainly is no way to win people over, because but the flip side of that, and the sad part is that often you can try to be as respectful as possible, and people still just won't. They don't want to hear what you have to say. You know, it doesn't matter if you're just not on their side, they're not listening. But I think regardless of that, you got to keep trying. You got to start a podcast, and you got to talk about things. Okay.
Exactly.
Thanks everybody for listening to the No Offense podcast. I hope you tune in next week. If you have anything to say, if you disagree, if you think I'm an idiot, if you think Roe's an idiot, if you think we're racist, if you think we're not racist, please comment, tweet us, and check in next week for the next No Offense podcast.